Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Broadway Jets YouTube channel. You'll know me from Twitter as NYJ Mike. I'm joined as always by the master of receipts, NYJ Matt, fresh off of his face reveal. And today we're going to be talking about another what if scenario. What if Breece Hall and AVT don't go out for the season at the same time in the Denver game in 2022?
Yeah, it's a tough scenario to look back on what would happen, but we'll walk through week by week what we think would have happened and do like a multiverse saga, right? Looking at what would have happened. So the Jets beat Denver, and at that time, like the next game's home against the Patriots. And one of the games that on the scorecard 22-17 doesn't look terrible, but the Jets had a late touchdown. Zach Wilson threw it for 300 yards, but looked terrible. That game, when you have Hall and AVT, I think turns out a lot differently. I think the Jets beat the Patriots at home to improve on their record after that game.
Yeah, well, so week 7, Jets are 4-2. They're in
Yeah.
they're in Denver, and always weird stuff happens when the Jets play in Denver. Either they play the worst game ever, they'll have like 92 total yards, or like in this game, you lose your two best offensive players. And a lot of people throughout the season, you shit on the offense, and rightfully so. The Jets threw for 15 touchdowns. It's 2022. It's not 1960. But you lost your best two guys. Like, would the Jets defense have been as good if Sauce Gardner and Quinning get hurt? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you. The Jets obviously won that game in Denver, but it was a very disturbing day. And then the next week that you're referencing is the JFM roughing the passer call game, where the Jets are, beating up on the Patriots. You're about to have a 17-3 lead at the half. That gets wiped out. The Patriots are going to win that game. You're right. I don't think that happens if the Jets have their two best offensive guys. So let's say the Jets are 6-2 at this point.
That would be 6-2, and then obviously the game after it, they beat Buffalo at home, which is at the best home game of the entire year. Does that game still happen? I mean, yeah, now you're looking at 7-2. And I don't think as we go further down the scenario, I don't think we're going to call the Jets to go 14-3 or anything like that. But it's honestly saying, hey, you beat Buffalo without your best two offensive players. What happens when you do have them there? And also, the Jets won that game on Josh Allen also playing very poorly. Weird turnovers, especially on the first drive of the game for them. So say they win that game, and what are they, 7-2 now?
They're 7-2. I think the next game would be and it has a lot of implications in a lot of different ways. So that the next game is the Jets had a bye. Then they go to New England, and that's the game they lost 10-3, where Zach Wilson was just unplayable, absolutely atrocious, and got benched and said weird stuff after the game, etc. So if AVT and Breece play, maybe the Jets still lose that game, but they play more competitively. Zach doesn't, the Jets had in that game 103 total yards and 2 yards in the second half. So you have to think that changes a little bit. You're handing the ball to Breece.
Yeah, and it's one of the one blemishes I think on Salah's record. He loses six straight to end the year, not great. But the second biggest one is not pulling Zach Wilson at halftime from that game. Because if Mike White plays the second half of that New England game, I'm betting a lot of money he doesn't have 2 yards and they have a chance to win that game.
Yeah.
So that's a huge knock on Salah. So in this multiverse scenario, if you're 7-3 going into the Bears game at home, is Zach Wilson benched, do you think? And say in this scenario, he does have those post game comments where he says, hey, it's not on the offense, it's on the entire team. You're 7-3 now with Chicago. Do you think we're pulling Zach Wilson
I'm
still?
not sure. You probably don't, honestly. I mean, it depends how he plays, but you probably don't. And then you probably still beat the Bears,
I like
which is
that. So
interesting. So you're probably 8-3.
8-3 and say Zach Wilson does play against Chicago. I think they lose to Minnesota on the road and Zach plays horrible. And Minnesota beats them by 2 scores, which obviously we know when they played them with Mike White, a Barrios drop away from potentially winning that game.
Mike
So I
White
think
was
maybe
so good in that game. Oh,
Mike White played his ass off. And I think this would be the scenario where the Jets are 8-4, losing to Minnesota, and they go to Mike White and they say we can't have a quarterback play for the final 5 weeks that can't get things going. Because in the scenario where they do beat the Bills and maybe the Patriots at home, we're not thinking Zach Wilson's balling out in that game. So 8-4, then they're in Buffalo with Mike White playing, and I think they lose again, but Mike White
yeah.
shows he can move the ball as a quarterback of this team.
Yeah, which is what he did. But and again, you're still going to have AVT and Breece. You're going to be more potent. But I agree, it's hard to predict a win in Buffalo. So now you're 8-5.
And
But
it's
you're 8-5, and now you're loaded up for the stretch run. You have your quarterback one, and this is
Mhm.
where in real life Mike White gets hurt and gets murdered by Matt Milano. Now you're going to play Detroit and Jacksonville at home, and you're going to win at least one of those two games.
I do. I agree with that. And now I keep thinking through what Breece Hall stats are now looking like throughout the year.
Oh,
Like, does he
dude.
rush for 1,200, 1,300 yards, and 9 touchdowns? Like, how cool would that be in that
It's probably
scenario?
more. It's probably more because the
Yeah.
last two games he played, he had 300 total yards and three touchdowns. And AVT's now an All Pro at all five offensive line spots.
So 8-5 against Detroit at home. I think the Jets win that game. I think the Jets
Yes,
rarely like. There's a lot of losses on the Jets' resume in the past 5 years where you look back and they didn't earn to win that game. Outside of a punt return, which give Detroit credit, they scored a punt return touchdown. The Jets did not. You were at the game; they weren't even close to tackling,
it's a
regardless.
weird
So,
play. Yeah.
so I think the Jets did enough to win this game. So now they would be 9-5 in prime time against the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence in a shitty cold weather game, rainy monsoon. 9-5 to the Jets get it done.
Does the weather change? Maybe like Breece Hall, his knee,
The
something changed.
butterfly effect of the
Yeah.
weather changing with Hall and AVT not getting hurt.
The game gets moved. I don't know. You could say you lose that game. You lost by 2 scores. It was horrific. The defense didn't look that good either. So now you're 9-6. And you just basically have to win one of the next two games against Seattle or Miami, and you're going to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I wonder with the offensive line, the stability of AVT. Obviously, 5 guys make up the line, but even having one all-pro blue chip guy there just changes everything. Like,
Yeah.
does Laken Tomlinson look as terrible at left guard if AVT is doing his job on the right side of the line, or does he switch over to play one of the tackle positions as we know he's done in the Pittsburgh game? So they're 9-6. I think that they lose against Seattle on the road and have a must-win game the final week of the year against Miami.
Yeah, and you probably win that game. Look, Tua's
Yeah.
out. You have Mike White, Breece, AVT all playing against Skylar Thompson. The Jets would be favored. They almost won that game anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the game the Dolphins obviously needed. So I think this is the scenario. You're 10-7 and you're in the playoffs.
I think that's what happened. So we go from 7-10. If AVT and Hall don't get hurt, the butterfly effect and the what if you
And
get to
them not getting hurt
10-7.
saves Mike White. Mike White then stays healthy and changes
Yep.
everything because he doesn't play at the same time. He's not getting murdered by Matt Milano. It really changes everything. And that's the thing. It's like when you look back at this season, well, I guess we could do what happens in the playoffs first.
Yeah, so 10-7, which is a big to say 3 wins come from 2 players, and it's not one of them being a quarterback. People might think we're crazy, but if you look at how they lost those games, I think it's fair to say what that can do for this team and this coaching staff. So 10-7, maybe they take Miami's spot and they're in Buffalo in the wild card weekend.
Yeah. I mean, we predicted the Jets to lose in Buffalo in the regular season. I think they would not be at all favored in that game. The Bills would probably be at least a touchdown favorites. But the Jets showed that they could beat the Bills. They could definitely play with them. The Jets defense gave Allen fits all year. The Bills only scored 39 points in 2 games against the Jets. So, we probably have to say that they lose that game because of the matchup, but
maybe they look respectable, right? Maybe Miami, even though they kept it close, I think Buffalo's up 17-0 and would turn the ball over late in the second quarter. The game kind of flipped where Miami came back a bit. So the Jets lose a tough game wild card weekend. I look back at the year, and the butterfly effect then is maybe Mike White is the guy they want to start in 2023, and they don't pursue a Carr or Rodgers as heavily, which would be a crazy scenario. Reminds you of 2015 where they just missed the playoffs, and they think they're good enough to run it back with Ryan Fitzpatrick, where maybe they should have went with a different option. Could be a scenario where we look back and saying, hey, 7-10 was terrible, but it led to an Aaron Rodgers, Derek Carr that led to 3 to 4 maybe good years ahead.
It's a great point. And the Mike White stuff, again, I've said this before on our show. What I saw out of Mike White against the Bears, Vikings, and Bills, I think that if Mike White doesn't get hurt in the Bills game, the Jets make the playoffs, which we kind of just detailed. Or at least they don't lose 6 in a row.
Right.
When he came back against Seattle with the 5 broken ribs and played like shit, it did not change my opinion of him as a player. He was hurt. So if there is a scenario where Rodgers goes to the Raiders, Carr goes to the Panthers, and then Jimmy G wants $1 bajillion, and Mike White is our starting quarterback next year, it's not the most disaster of all disasters. I'm gonna be sick. I'm already convinced myself the Jets are getting Aaron Rodgers,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna literally vomit if he goes somewhere else. But if the Jets, if he just doesn't want to come to New York, and the Jets did all they could and made a better offer, and he goes to the Raiders, and the Jets end up with Mike White, fine, fuck it, fine.
We've given our rankings before, and it's Aaron Rodgers is one.
Yeah,
Assuming Lamar Jackson goes back to Baltimore on an extension, which is probably going to happen.
yes,
Rodgers one, Carr two,
good,
Garoppolo three.
check. And I probably would put Tannehill in front of Mike White.
Tannehill potentially four, but then the guys that you'll hear over Mike White from some of the Jets fans will be like, "Oh, give me Baker Mayfield," which I would rather Mike White over Baker Mayfield.
Yeah,
At least because I feel like I know Mike White's untapped potential could be ahead of Baker's. Like Baker will be steady enough to give you a potential of 500 winning record. He made the playoffs before. So
yep.
I'll never, if someone comes to me and they're like, "Hey, I want Baker over Mike White," I would never be like, "You're a crazy person. I don't agree
Well,
with
that's
that
not
take."
fair. Yeah,
But there's then you get the next tier of guys where you can look at like Jacoby Brissett. I'd rather Mike White. Zach
yeah.
Wilson. I'd rather Mike White. Like you start going down the road, and Mike White doesn't look like a terrible option. But when you're so close to Rodgers, as it really feels like the Jets are, anything short of that outside of Derek Carr or Jimmy G at the right price kind of feels like a failure.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But
Yeah.
in this scenario, Mike White's 10-7. Well, he's not 10-7. He's whatever his record
Yeah.
is. And Zach Wilson played a lot of games, but he's in the playoffs. He plays a solid game. It's something to think about. And it's interesting too because this is the same exact team. If the Jets did go 10-7 and make the playoffs this year, or 9-8, and they snuck in, the aura around the team would be, wow, what a young up and coming sick team with a young cool coach. They have the defensive rookie of the year. They have the potential offensive rookie of the year, and it would probably just be Breece Hall, not Garrett Wilson. They have, they have AVT. You have a top 5 defense. Oh my God, this team is up and young and upcoming. It's the same team. They had a tough collapse at the end, but they lost their quarterback and they lost their other 2 best offensive players in this fake scenario. All 3 of those guys are around at the end of the season, and the Jets do move on. So frustrating.
I think the annoying thing too is it wasn't. Why can't Breece Hall have an MCL sprain and he's out 4 to 6 weeks, and we look at maybe he'll be back by the end of the week 18 game, but at the end of the day, he's not going to miss the entire offseason. Or like AVT, MCL sprain, maybe out for the rest of the year, but we don't have 2 injuries where they're fully done for the year and then have to rehab their way back all summer. Like that's the most annoying part, and that's why getting them back healthy, I think, is top tier in terms of priorities outside of free agency and the draft. Like those 2 guys coming back full 100% is way more important than like a mid-tier free agent pickup. I just can't have one of these guys be like missing most of camp, getting back in week 1 rusty. Like that's not what you want from 2 of your blue chip guys.
Yeah, it feels like AVT will come back quicker with the arm injury. Breece, obviously, with the knee, even though he's already doing stuff. It really is a shame. And it's funny too, because we've talked about it before. It's like it felt like kind of a relatively healthy season for the Jets. We're like, wow, what good luck we had with health. Like the defense was pretty healthy.
Defense was unbelievably healthy.
Yeah, and even like it looked like Quinnen died in the Jaguars game.
He got hit on the sideline.
Yeah. Oh, dude, it looked like he tore his Achilles. We're like, he's never playing again, and then he came back. So like, all right, that's good.
Yeah.
But look, for this quote unquote terrific health season, you lose literally your best 2 players on offense. You fucking Zach Wilson gets hurt in the preseason, was a disaster. Because at that time he's your QB1. Then your other QB1 gets hurt, Mike White. Corey Davis misses a bunch of games. You have 17 right tackles.
Yeah.
It's like, they're so lucky, the Jets. Yeah. 1 year, the fucking real good health. That's why it's so impressive. Some of these teams that make the playoffs 4 or 5 years in a row, I can't even, but.
Yeah, no, it's a good what if scenario. We have a lot more what if scenarios down the pipeline, but this is the one today wanting to look at what if the top 2 guys don't go down. And I love your analogy of what happens if top 2 defensive guys go down. Like what happens to your team in that scenario? And it was very unfortunate. The good thing is Breece Hall is 23 and AVT is 24. These guys are young. They can come back healthy. But a good what if scenario. End of the day, it's 10-7 losing wild card weekend, and you go into 2023 with some optimism, but maybe you don't go after the quarterback position as hard if Mike White shows in that final stretch what he can do, which is, regardless, I would still go after Aaron Rodgers anytime he hits the market when you have a question mark at quarterback. But Mike, anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, maybe it'll be a blessing in disguise that things happen the way they did. Everything happens for a reason.
Yes, sir. All right, we'll be back. If you made it this far, don't forget to hit subscribe. I forgot to say at the beginning.
Hit it.
I think 85% of viewers aren't subscribed, and 100% of viewers are male between 25 and 42. So we have a great demographic. We got to get out there more. But Mike, I appreciate it, buddy.
Good stuff.